Good day, Eric.
Hi, Dave. How you doing?
I'm wonderful.
Good.
Here we are today to talk about drones, also known by multiple other names. Well, give us a little intro.
Well, when drones first came out, nobody wanted to call them drones because everyone associates drones with military vehicles that drop bombs and kill innocent people on occasion. So they came up with a bunch of other names for them, such as UAV, which stands for Unmanned Aerial Vehicle, UAS, Unmanned Aerial System. However, when you're talking about going out and doing some photography, it's much easier to say, yeah, I'm going to take my drone out today than I'm going to take my unmanned aerial system out today. So basically we're calling them all drones by this time.
We've kind of gotten over the phobia about calling them drones.
Yes, however, in the newspaper there still is a phobia now about drones hitting airliners and things like that. So just recently there was a big newspaper article that read, suspected drone hits British Airways jet about to land, and there was quite a big to-do about that. And actually, some of the headlines say drone hits airliner, and then only the word alleged drone, or the phrase alleged drone, was used later on. Then about 5 days later, the powers that be kind of admitted that perhaps it was just a plastic bag because there's no damage found on the airliner. So anyway, drones continue to be in the news, not necessarily for the best reasons.
Well, regardless of what we call them,
yes.
What are they?
Well, we've got a whole bunch of them in front of us today. So let's start going over some of the drones that I brought in and give our readers or our viewers an idea of what's out in the market today and what they may be considering if they're going to either be dealing with legal issues surrounding drones or perhaps buying one and flying it themselves.
Great idea.
Well, when we look at the drones here, you can see that these are all hobbyist recreational drones. They range in size from teensy-tiny to about 3.5 pounds, like this one right here. They all function in the same basic way. There's something that's called a controller that you use to control the flight of the drone. Now, the quality of the controller obviously depends on how much you paid for the drone. So when you're dealing with one of these small little, this is a quadcopter, this is a hexacopter. When you're dealing with something like this that you can get on Amazon.com for $16, the control is not nearly as good as it is with a $1,400 drone or a $500 drone.
Right.
Now, some of the smaller drones, these are great for learning how to fly because they're very cheap, they're fairly indestructible. If you look at this one, it even has protection over the props. So if you happen to grab the drone out of the sky, it's not going to cut your hands. If you drop the drone, it falls out of the sky. It's not going to damage itself. At the same time, the controls for these are not very good. Yeah. So these are great for learning how to fly a drone. However, the cheaper drones don't have cameras in them. This is probably about the cheapest drone. This is a $49 drone. It actually has a small camera in it, but it won't take very good pictures or quality of video. So if you want to get pretty pictures and nice video, you have to move up to a more expensive drone.
What if I wanted to start with, I didn't want to spend $1,400,
yes,
but I want to do a little bit better than the $16, where do I go?
The Parrot Bebop would be a great place to start. This is a Parrot Bebop. These are made by a company headquartered in France, and this is about a $400 drone. It takes pretty good video. It's fairly lightweight. It's virtually indestructible. As a matter of fact, if you look at this one, you'll notice that it's got all sorts of dirt all over the bottom. And if you look carefully at one of the propellers, you'll see this one right here. You'll see this was bent back on itself this last weekend because I crashed it into the side of an abandoned spot.
And yet it
that
still flies.
Still flies perfectly.
Still flies.
Yes. So this is a really good way to start. You can get off the ground, so to speak, for about $400.
Right.
This has a very good camera inside. Now, when you're talking about cameras, it's interesting to note that there are two basic approaches to photography. The first is to have an internal gimbal. So this drone tracks laterally like this. The internal gimbal stabilizes the camera and makes sure that you're shooting still with a flat horizon. This is model right here. This is the DJI Phantom 2 Vision Plus. This model has a gimbal right here that will adjust the angle of the camera. And so with a drone like this, when you're flying it at a slant, the gimbal will actually adjust the angle of the camera. With the gimbal 2, you can rotate the camera up or down so you can get various fields of view. This
Pretty
is about
sophisticated.
$1,400 drone when you buy them new. This right here is the Bebop 2. The Bebop 2 is the successor to the Bebop 1, and the Bebop 2 has a number of advantages over the Bebop 1. First of all, it's got a better camera. Second of all, it has a battery, and this battery will give you the longest life of any battery in the hobbyist market. You can get this for 25 minutes or so, getting the drone up in the air for 25 minutes, which is a significant improvement. With the Bebop 1, you're looking at about 14 minutes of flight time. Phantom 2 Vision Plus, maybe 16, 17, 18. But this actually gives you a lot more room.
A lot more.
A lot more room to take pictures, move your camera to various locations, take various angles, and then get it down safely.
So Eric, I remember in the old days remote-controlled airplanes, and now we've come a long way from remote-controlled airplanes to drones. Why are there legal issues? Why are we talking about the law?
That's a good point. And it's a good question. The honest answer to that is that when you did amateur airplane flying and you had remote control airplanes and helicopters and things like that, you had a few thousand people doing it in every state, and sometimes you'd have big meetings where they'd all fly their remote control airplanes together, and you'd maybe have a couple hundred people show up. Well, the estimates for the sale of drones for Christmas presents for last Christmas season was 700,000. And so you've had a huge, huge increase in the number of remotely controlled vehicles that are up in the air. Drones have taken off. They're one of the most popular Christmas presents last year, and at this point there may be well over 1 million in the skies in the United States alone. And that number already, and that number may be growing rapidly because, as with software and as with computers, the drone technology, because it basically is a flying computer, the drone technology is getting so good that they're getting much more desirable, both in terms of a hobbyist thing to use for fun and indeed for people to use commercially for shooting pictures of houses, for shooting movies and things like that. And as with any type of field where the number of items in it are growing exponentially, the need for laws to somehow regulate it seems to go hand in hand.
Well, since we're talking about laws and rules, why don't we start with the FAA? That seems to be the logical place to start, I think.
Sure. Well, the funny thing about filming any type of video on drone law is the fact that what you and I are talking about today is probably going to be an antique by the time this is edited and put out. As a matter of fact, when you and I did the California State Bar presentation, I know a number of the FAA rules that we were discussing at that point are now basically history. So
you mean all those 4 months ago?
yeah, exactly. So I think when we talk about FAA rules and we talk about the state and local rules, we're dealing with a rapidly changing scene here. But in terms of what's happening right now, the FAA was apparently the FAA does have jurisdiction over drones as a result of the Perker case. Assuming that FAA does have jurisdiction over drones, the FAA has some current rules and they've got some proposed rules. The first thing is they deal with how high can you fly your drone. Right now, as of this shooting, you can fly your drone 400 feet above the ground. The FAA has proposed increasing that to 500 feet. Personally, I don't see the reason for that. I would like to keep it at 400 feet since airplanes are supposed to stay above 500 feet. If you've got the drones at 400 feet, you've got a 100-foot buffer zone. You let the drones fly at 500 feet, and there's certainly the possibility if somebody's off by a foot of a collision. So there has to be some sort of a vertical limit. Then the other FAA rule right now has a limitation within 5 miles of airports. So for example, we are about 300 yards away from Palomar Airport. So this morning I called air traffic control, and this was actually probably the funniest phone call I've ever had with air traffic control, because I left a message saying we're going to fly a drone today and it's going to be within 5 miles of the airport, but I'm only going to get it 6 feet off the ground. And so normally when I've flown in this location before, we've talked about how high I'm going to get the drone and what type of day, because we have a helicopter flight path that goes right over our office building. But keeping it above 6 feet will be quite easy for us to accommodate. But yeah, within 5 miles of an airport, you're supposed to notify the airport.
How far in advance? Is there any set time limit?
It's very fuzzy right now what you're supposed to do. I had an interesting situation in Chico. I was up there visiting one of my patent clients, and I agreed to fly over their building and take some pictures of their building for them. And I called the air traffic controller at Chico, and Chico's a relatively small airport, of course, compared to LAX or San Diego. And I began by saying, well, okay, I'm calling you to notify you that I'm going to be flying my drone because under the FAA rules, I have to notify you I'm flying. And he said, well, actually, on the contrary, you're going to ask me my permission to fly. And I said, well, I don't think I really have to do that. I think I just have to notify you. And I thought that we could work out where what kind of limitations you're going to put on my flight. Anyway, we both postured for a little while and then decided that we would both get a lot further if we were reasonable. So I said, okay, what do you want me to do? He goes, well, can you keep it under 150 feet? And I said, no problem. I'm just going to be above a rooftop. I'll keep it below 100. He said, fine. Call me before you start flying and call me after. Here's my cell phone number. I just want to know what you're doing. I said, fine. It was no problem at all. So that was a very easy way to communicate with air traffic control. Now, we're here in Carlsbad, right next to Palomar Airport. Within 5 miles of Palomar Airport, there are, thousands and thousands of homes, many of which probably own drones. I don't think everybody calls air traffic control before they fly. If they all were to call air traffic control before they flew, we'd probably have a real glut of air traffic control spending more of their time answering questions from dronists than they would perhaps directing planes, so that would be a big problem. One thing that's been proposed is that dronists file a flight plan similar to what you do if you're going to send a manned aircraft up in the air. And so in that case, a dronist such as myself, I'd send an email in saying, okay, I intend to fly. Do you have any problems with it? And then that could go into a database. They would then keep a record of my proposed flight height, the location, and all that. And then perhaps I could send them another email once I had finished my flight. So that may be more feasible for the future.
Well, if I buy one of these off the shelf, do I need to get a license to fly one?
Well, as of today, you need to register yourself as a drone pilot, and you need to put proof of your registration on your drone itself. So if you look at that,
no kidding.
What I've done here is this is my actual registration certificate. And so I paid $5. I registered myself as a drone pilot, and I have copies of that taped to each one of the drones that I fly. On the back of it is my email address and my phone number, because if my drone disappears somewhere, I would hope that somebody would peel this off and give me a call and let me know.
Is that true even for the $16 starter versions?
We've had a lot of jokes about where exactly do you put your certificate on this, but yeah, if you're going to fly this outdoors, theoretically you should have this on it. However, that's not going to fly very well.
Yeah.
So there are a number of different laws being considered right now. One of which would include having something called a micro UAV or a micro drone category, and they're looking at maybe 3.5 or 5 pounds as a limit. A number of other countries have already implemented these, where a tiny little drone is dealt with differently than, say, a 55-pound drone that's carrying a professional quality movie camera.
But even if you don't have to put the notice or the license on the drone, do you still have to have the license in order to fly?
If you're going to fly outside, you need the license.
Even for one of the little baby
ones?
Yes, okay.
As of today.
Right.
Now, again, that may change in the future, and the other thing, too, is that...
Can you get the license online?
Yes, you can.
Okay.
Yeah. The other thing that's kind of funny is you may look at one of these little drones and think, well, why could you possibly need a license for this as opposed to one of these big drones? Well, the advantage of one of these big drones is they have some very advanced technology that works most of the time, where it returns to home if you lose the signal. One of these, you lose the signal, you never know what it's going to do.
Right.
So in a way, these larger drones are safer than the smaller drones.
Eric, how do you control one of these guys?
Well, we've got a couple of controllers in here. So for example, to control the Phantom 2 Vision Plus here, this is the controller that comes along with it. And what you do here is you set up your cell phone. There are a couple of components to a drone. The first thing is there's the drone, the camera, and the drone needs a battery to keep it up in the air. Then with the controller, there's an antenna that transmits radio signal to control it. There are joysticks here that control the direction of the drone, and then you have to see what the drone is doing, and so you hook up your camera. And so basically, through your camera, you see what the camera is seeing here. Now, under current FAA rules, you need to keep the drone within line of sight. So I can be looking in here to see what my picture is, but I also have to be able to keep my eye on the drone so I know what the drone is doing.
Okay.
Now, with the Parrot Bebop, on the other hand, you have something here called a sky controller. Now, this has this big, huge antenna right here. This antenna is obviously a little bit larger than this one.
Yeah.
So this drone right here is supposed to have a range of a couple kilometers. Now, obviously, I don't fly it a couple kilometers away because my eyes are not good enough. I can't see this thing more than about 300 yards away from me, so I keep it within view there. But the way you set up one of these is you get out your sky controller, and you can actually fly it with an iPad if you want. So you put the iPad on the sky controller. The sky controller has its own battery right here. You turn on the sky controller. You turn on your iPad. And the first thing you do is you use the software to connect to the sky controller. And then what we're going to do is have the sky controller connect to the Bebop. And at that point, I should be able to control the Bebop through these toggles and then look on my iPad to see where it's going.
Fantastic.
So right now I'm finding the software.
oder Ultraschall, sie sind überall. Mein Trommelfell spielt die Information vom leisesten bis zum lautesten Ton ein Widerhall. Unformuliert, aber wirklich extrem für mein Nervensystem, das ist der Klang deiner Geräusche. Das ist viel mehr als Musik, nicht berührt mich so massiv, instinktiv, positiv, nicht zitärlich, intensiv, ich werd hyperaktiv durch den Klang deiner Geräusche. Das sind geile Geräusche, du machst so geile Geräusche. Deine Geräusche, das sind geile Geräusche, du machst so geile Geräusche. Deine Geräusche, das sind geile Geräusche, du machst so geile Geräusche. Deine Geräusche, das sind geile Geräusche, du machst so geile Geräusche. Unformatiert und unformuliert, aber wirklich extrem für mein Nervensystem, das ist der Klang.
Eric, what about first-person view FPV?
Sure. Well, the way that we just flew here is we flew by looking at a screen. And so I was able to look at the screen to see what the drone was seeing, but at the same time I was able to keep my eye on the drone. FPV stands for first-person view, and these are generally goggles that you wear over your eyes, and they allow you to see directly out of the camera of the drone. And so it's almost as though you're flying in the drone itself. Now the advantage is it's a heck of a ride because you're seeing what the drone sees. And a lot of the people who like to use these are in the drone racing community. And so drone racing, none of these are racing drones. These are more photography drones. But a racing drone is designed to go very fast, up to 100 miles an hour, maybe even higher than that. And they're basically for going very fast. The batteries don't last very long, and when they crash, it's spectacular. But with a racing drone, they generally like to fly those FPV, so you can see exactly what the drone is looking at. Now, the disadvantage of FPV is because you're wearing the goggles, you're really blinded to what's around you.
So is there an increased risk of accident?
Absolutely, because you can't see what's on the side of you. For example, a couple of summers ago, we used drones to photograph the roofs of a bunch of temples in Thailand. And the temple inspection is done by monks, and the monks have to climb these rickety ladders, and they have to get up on top of the temple and see which roof tiles are cracked and things like that. Obviously, the Thai temples can be 50, 60 feet above the ground. These ladders are bamboo ladders with these cross pieces that are, hammered and nailed in there and tied up with inner tubes. They're terrible ladders. You never want to go up one yourself. So the monks go up there, and every year, in Thailand, at least a couple monks fall to their death or are seriously injured. So, basically, we took some of our drones up and shot the roofs, brought down the footage, showed the monks on the laptop, and the monks were able to see which roof tiles were cracked and where they needed to have repair jobs done without having to climb the ladders. I had to be very, very aware of the trees that were around me because oftentimes the temples have trees that grow up the side, so I couldn't just do a back-off shot without being able to see what was behind me. Now,
so the monks were open to learning how to become dronists?
Particularly the skinny young ones.
Right.
Once you become a monk is not exactly an athletic lifestyle. So
right.
The longer you've been a monk, usually the heavier you are. And so when a young monk is initiated into the monkhood, he is often a very young, skinny young man because the average Thai diet is brown rice and vegetables with a little meat fish thrown in from time to time. So they usually stick the young skinny monks doing the rooftop inspections. So when I was flying at this temple for the first time, a lot of the older monks were really, they kind of thought it was fun, but they weren't really that enthusiastic about it. But the younger monks, they were extremely excited about it. Matter of fact, we have a video of when we first brought the drone down and popped the memory card into the laptop to show them. The younger monks were just saying, yeah, this is great. Telling the chief monk, we need to buy one, and we need to buy one because, I'm the one who has to do the rooftop inspection. So, but yeah, in a case like that, I may have had trees 10 feet behind me. I couldn't have flown first-person view because I had to know exactly where the drone was.
Right.
So first-person view is wonderful. It's really a lot of fun, but you don't have any peripheral vision.
And it sounds like you mostly see it being used in the drone racing environment.
Yes, yeah. It's a different view. It's kind of like mounting a GoPro on the helmet of a motorcycle rider.
Right.
It doesn't give you that wonderful view of the motorcycle rider doing his or her tricks, but it sure is great to film exactly what they're seeing.
Doug, let's talk a little bit about federal and state laws regarding privacy. Maybe let's start with the FAA and kind of see where things are at right now with the FAA fact sheet. And
good. I think the important thing to realize when it comes to the federal and state regulation here is that the Federal Aviation Administration did put out this fact sheet in mid-December of 2015, in which the Chief Counsel set forth the FAA's position as an administrative body on its preemption of rules over state and local issues. And the fact sheet claims that the FAA has field preemption over the subject matter of operations, airspace, altitude, those sorts of matters. But it also carves out, or at least says that the state and local governments do continue to have control over issues or legislation that would deal with issues such as police warrants, privacy or trespass-related issues. They're a specific example related to statutes that would govern like voyeurism, people flying drones over the neighbors sunbathing people or that sort of a thing. And then also they suggested prohibitions on using drones for hunting or fishing would be appropriate for the states to regulate, as well as governing issues like attaching firearms or things like that to drones or unmanned aerial vehicles, as they're sometimes called.